Welcome to session 2. We're going to look at the 5 sort of stages that an adult man goes through in his life and see how all of these different stages give new opportunities for a man to hear about the Christian faith and respond to it. The first period, if you like, for the adult man is in his 20s and 30s. Those are the years that I'm calling the upward and onward years. They are the years when he is heavily involved in establishing himself, concentrating, if you like, on establishing himself at work. Often there's a great sort of competitive element in the situation, so these years can often be tension-ridden. He's attempting to establish himself as a parent, if there are young children. So 20s and 30s, upward and onward years, and also a sort of triangle time for a man. He's a bit like a sort of rubber band man, that he's being stretched into a triangle shape and he can be pulled in any direction at once. And if in fact he gets pulled in all 3 directions, put under pressure in all 3 directions, he will then tend to revert to childhood. Classic sort of example of his escape mechanism. When I ask men what they want, what they hope for from their wife during these upward and onward years, they tell me that they want their wife to be a mother, looking after them. They want their wife to be a film star figure, so that they can show her off to their colleagues at work, and their colleagues will say, "Goodness, did she marry you? Fancy that." And they want their wife to be a sort of Joan of Arc, fighting their battles. And all of that is man's sort of daydreams, if you like. That's what he hopes for from his wife during these years. Then you move into the 30s and perhaps on in the 40s. These are the consolidation years, when he will build on previous achievements. If he's in school teaching, this is when he becomes head of department or maybe an assistant headmaster. This is the sort of period of time when in business perhaps he changes company and he gets promotion in the next company that he joins. Sometimes, of course, a man gets promoted beyond his ability, and that always adds tension. But generally speaking, these are consolidation years. And then somewhere around 40, or it may happen later than 45 or even at 50, man hits what is commonly termed midlife crisis. It used to be the 40 mark. People used to put adverts in the, or little sort of reminders in the paper when it was a man's 40th birthday. There used to be an advert that said, "Philisan fortifies the over 40. You don't remember that. You're much too young. Oh, you do remember it. You're older than I thought. Well, that was the sort of psychosocial marker, the 40 point, midlife crisis time. The bad news, I'm afraid, is that it can take a man a period of time to come through midlife crisis. He doesn't get over it in a month or 3 months. Just as for a woman, change of life is not one period, not one sort of month and it's all over. Change of life can take a period of time, so it can for the man. Midlife crisis can take some time to come through. Here's one of the key factors. He will stop thinking and ultimately saying, he stops saying, "if I die," and he starts to say, "when I die." It's a very significant moment in a man's turning point. When, "if I die," it'll never happen to me, but suddenly he starts saying when it happens. And usually it's accomplished by a feeling that he's not achieved anything with his life. He's spent 47 years, 48 years, and he's not done anything, he feels. I know a man, he's managing director of 5 companies, hit midlife crisis, he feels he's not done anything with his life. He's wasted all his life, but he's been successful in terms of business, certainly. Midlife crisis for the man is crazy ideas time. He comes home and he says, "Darling, we're going to sell up and we're going to buy a farm on the Isle of Skye and be self-sufficient from now on." He doesn't know a thing about farming, but that's his sort of wild idea. And you'll reel from that kind of thing. You know, you'll be working it out on paper, how it could work out and what the ferries are and how much it'd cost and all the rest of it, and he comes home a fortnight later, he's forgotten all about the Isle of Skye. Never enters his head. Now what he wants to do is open a bed and breakfast house down in Cornwall. And a fortnight later he's forgotten about Cornwall. Now he wants to set up a mushroom farm somewhere. And also he swings, this sort of pendulum swinging, sure sign of midlife crisis. It's the time when, for a man, if he had the occasional drink, maybe now he has an extra drink. Well, there's another encouragement story for you to take. Right. He's coming around the... Goodness me. I would have cut my hair. Another day. Now he finishes the bottle. The extra drink seems to be needed. It's all part of trying to cope with this pressure of midlife time. And it's the sort of period when sometimes a man will take his secretary out for dinner. There may be nothing sexual in it at all initially. It can go down into that, of course, but initially all he is trying to do is turn the clock back. He's trying to prove that he's still attractive to younger women. And he will do the strangest things, out of character things, in an attempt to sort of escape from himself. He feels trapped by what he's got and who he is. And he tries to escape. It's compulsion to escape time. Then you move on. The good news is that men do come through midlife crisis incidentally. They can be years of great peace. Many marriages hit a great period of contentment in the sort of 50s. Of course, if he doesn't come to terms with himself, then it can be a period of bitterness as well later on. Years of age. So a man can take retirement maybe 50, maybe as late as 65. I find I have to remind modern audiences that retirement is a new phenomena in our society. There didn't used to be such a thing as retirement here in the United Kingdom, not all that many years ago. See, nowadays the life expectancy for a man is 72 years. For a woman it's 77. At the turn of the century, life expectancy for a man was 48. He didn't retire, he just didn't come back from work, either because of illness, frailty, he sort of had an accident at work, or literally he had his heart attack at work and never came back. So retirement is quite a new situation, quite a new sort of modern phenomena. It's interesting how many men turn their retirement hobby into a job. You watch that and see how it happens. Men turn their retirement hobby into a sort of job of work. Like my father turned the shopping into a job, if you like, doing the sort of weekly shopping. Here's a man, he said to his wife, I'm looking forward to retiring, dear, because I can do the garden as I've always wanted to. And not only did he have the garden, but they had an allotment area as well that he was responsible for. He wanted to grow vegetables, you see, and prove how good he was at growing vegetables. Well, 2 years after, he's grown so many vegetables that the family can't eat them, the neighbours can't eat them, their friends can't eat them. He's now selling them through the local shop. He's negotiated to sell them as organically grown vegetables. You see, he's turned his hobby into a job. You know why? Because without a job, he doesn't exist, you see. Man spends so much of his time. I mean, 8 hours in the office at least, and hours travelling. So a large proportion, a huge percentage of his living time from age 16 or 20, depending whether he went to college, university, but from early days right through 40 years of his life, he spent all this time at work, and it's work that's given him meaning to life. Take away the scaffolding of work, and there's nothing left sometimes for men. So retirement becomes, for some, a time of great serenity, others, a time of great disappointment. Now, all of these periods of life offer new opportunities when a man can hear again about Christianity. The opportunities keep on coming. Our God in this world gives men many opportunities to believe. Now, the man has to make his own mind up. He has his own personality, and God respects a man's personality. God doesn't force his way in if the man doesn't invite him in. But nonetheless, the opportunities do come on many occasions. Crisis times are opportunity times. Unemployment. Now, I'm not advocating unemployment. I'm not supporting unemployment. I'm not saying unemployment should be used as a sort of regulator in the economy. But I am saying that many men have actually become Christians after being made redundant. The unemployment crisis has been the thing that has hit them, particularly a man who's a sort of manager type man. Here's a case history from the West Country. This man had built up a company. They had employed about 40 other men. And then the company was taken over by another United Kingdom company, and then taken over by an American company. And the American company decided that the West Country branch wasn't needed anymore in its European operations. So they sent a representative across and said, all your employees must be made redundant. This particular man, he was a good man, and he argued for the best redundancy terms that he could get for his employees, but then he had to sack them all. He had to make them all unemployed. And then he got a telephone from the United States, telephone call, saying, thank you, Mr. Jones, for doing that job so efficiently. Now we do not need you anymore. You are redundant. And this man in his late 40s suddenly realized that he wasn't going to get a manager's job like that anymore. You go in your late 40s, early 50s, you're too old or you're overqualified. And he recognized he wasn't going to get that sort of position. Now, it was fun at first. He could do all the decorating that he'd promised his wife to do. But that ran out after a month or two. And for the first time in his life, he's got time to think. And he starts saying, what is life for? He starts asking the questions, why am I here? Who am I? What's it all about? He thought it was all about getting the company together and employing all these people and being in charge. And all of that evaporates. And he suddenly starts saying, hey, what is life for? And a godly minister has led him to know Christ. Unemployment was the actual crisis opportunity. Illness can be an opportunity time, or an injury. A man who's been a keen sportsman and suddenly he can't play his sport anymore. That is an opportunity time when he starts asking questions. Loss of a father or loss of a business colleague. Now, the man may not show his emotions. He's been taught to hide them. But they are there, believe me. They are there under the surface. And he's hit by this. Lillian went along to a funeral just recently. Funeral of a man in his early 30s, and his business colleagues were there, and some of the people from the university town where he'd lived were there. These people were absolutely shattered. And they were listening to the preacher as they'd never listened to a preacher before, because suddenly death had encroached, you see, upon their environment. So death, loss of any sort of close person, has in fact this opportunity time as well. Fatherhood is an opportunity time. When every man wants to be a good father, when he becomes a father, it actually does affect the man far more than he ever lets on usually. When our first son was born in the maternity hospital at Ilford, and the hospital rang me to say, you have a little son, little boy, but your wife has had a severe hemorrhage. Will you come immediately? And so I immediately jumped in the car and got to the hospital, and they put a gown on me and a mask on me and gloves on me and marched me right into the sort of room. And all the attention, medical attention, of course, was concentrated on Lillian and dealing with this hemorrhage. The baby, little Jeffrey, had been dumped in a cot. And he was okay, you see, so they just dumped him. And I walked past the cot and glanced down and couldn't move. I mean, I was supposed to be there to help Lillian, but I couldn't move because there is a three-dimensional photograph of me. I've seen me as a little baby, and that was me, only this one moved, you see. This one was real and it was alive. Every man is affected by fatherhood. Now, I don't know whether you've used, I'm sure you have used in your church, the James Dobson series, Focus on the Family, series that he made some years ago. James Dobson is an American Bible teacher. And one of those series in the Focus on the Family group, it's on video now, and it's about fatherhood. And we would get it and use it in a home. Just invite the prospective fathers and the new fathers along. All these fringe men, some of these husbands. Just the men folk, put it on the video. They're not threatened, you see, by watching the box. They might be threatened by coming to church and hearing a preacher, but they're not threatened by watching the box. And Dobson argues that if you're going to be a good father on earth, you have to know the good father in heaven. That's his argument. And I've seen that have tremendous effect. It's been another link in the chain for some men in coming to faith. So fatherhood has an impact time, is an impact time. Moving. Whenever there's a move, perhaps a move to a new church, or certainly a move to a new district. See, on a Sunday morning, perhaps this husband cleans the car on a Sunday morning. Now, he can't start going to church, because if he did, all the neighbours would miss him cleaning the car, and they'd say to him next week, were you ill last week? Weren't you well? You know, he weren't out cleaning the car. So he can't lose face like that. That would embarrass him. But if you move to a new district, well, people don't know what he does on a Sunday morning. He can start going to church. It's another opportunity time. Here's a man whose his company have sent him up north to develop a new branch up there. And his family, of course, the house hasn't sold yet, so the family, his wife and children, are still down in the house, and the company pay for him to be in a hotel. He's up there some weekends as well because of the work situation. We've said to that man, why don't you find a church for your wife to attend when you manage to sell the house and you all move as a family? See what we're doing? We're putting him first. We're giving him the job of leading. And his wife, actually, he's got time on his hands, so he's going round all these churches up there. His wife is involved in quite a lively charismatic church. So he's going round all these charismatic churches, asking, where are these sort of charismatic churches? And going to them all. He's not doing it for himself, you see. At least that's what he pretends. But I reckon he's going to become a Christian before he actually sells the house, certainly with the housing market at a low ebb. So any time of moving is a new chance. Midlife crisis clearly is a new chance time, a new opportunity time, a second chance time. You see, for a man at midlife, if he reached for the stars, he knows now he's not going to get there. Whatever sort of level he was employed at, whether he was a managing director or just a junior sort of employee, whatever his routine work, he knows now some of his dreams are not going to be fulfilled, some of his ideals are not going to be achieved. And this is the time when he starts asking, what is life for? He asks the big question. He asks the question, is there anyone out there? And if you ask the question, is there anyone out there? You have to say, who was the one who said he came from out there to down here? That was Jesus. You're into asking religious questions. Now here's something I've observed. You get a young wife, becomes a Christian in her 20s, and the husband is uncommitted, and they come to a sort of arrangement as the years go by, and she goes to church, and the youngsters maybe go as well, and they get converted, and he just comes occasionally to carol service. Then midlife crisis hits this man. Sometimes, he's not good at words, you see. He can't express what he really wants to discover about faith. But he's under the surface, he's searching. But what happens now? Well, his wife is too busy. She's on 3 church committees now in her 40s or early 50s. And she's out every night. The children are grown up. They're in the worship group at church. And the wife often doesn't have time to see the new opportunity that's come along. Never miss that opportunity. You need to confirm the man, commend the man as often as you can. Build him up in that period of time as much as you can. But also realize that there'll be a search going on under the surface for some kind of meaning to life, some kind of faith. And one of the other great opportunity times, second chance times, is retirement. I don't know whether you know about the 2 years after syndrome. But my medical friends tell me that 2 years after a man retires, more men die than at any other period. If he retires at 53, 55 has a blip on the charts, more men die. If he retires at 65, 67, more men fade away. If he retires at 73, it's 75. 2 years afterwards, you've taken the sort of structure down of his job, and he doesn't count for anything, and he sort of fades away 2 years after. Now, those who train people in the secular realm and prepare people, men for retirement, tend to run courses that they deal with some health management and they deal with some money management. But here's the other thing all these courses say. They say when you retire, you ought to prepare for retirement so that when you retire, you enter into a new age of life, a new sphere of life. You want some new friends, some new contacts, some new ambitions, some new goals to achieve, some new things to do, new places to go to when you retire. Get ready for that. What better time then to introduce a man to Christianity than when he retires? A whole new group of friends, whole new ambitions, whole new world to live in, a world of eternity. And did you know that at retirement, there is in a man a willingness to follow a lead from his wife at retirement time? My expert researchers tell me that the wife has more influence at retirement than at any time since courtship days. Now, do you remember how he used to leap off the cliff and swim through the sharks and climb aboard the boat and break into the cabin and put the box of chocolates in the corner with a little card? Remember how he did that? No? Oh, well, maybe some did. Retirement time again gives this opportunity time. Here's a case history from south side of London, and this lady, a lovely Christian lady, she'd prayed for her husband for many years. She actually played the organ in her chapel. Her husband was a school caretaker, so he couldn't come to church on Sunday because he was getting the school ready for Monday, you see, doing all the odd jobs and the repairs and so on. And when it came to retirement time for the husband, she very wisely cleared her name off the rota for playing the organ. So she cleared her name off for a whole month or so that she wasn't involved in having to play the organ. And she said to her husband, next week's your first free Sunday after retirement. What do you want to do? I've cleared my name off the rota so I don't have to go to church and play the organ. And she thought he'd like to visit someone or go to the seaside or have a weekend away. You know what he said? He said, why don't we go to church together? And he did. The very first Sunday after retirement, he came along. It just so happened we were explaining what it involves for a man to become a Christian. We were saying it sort of clearly, A, B, C, D. And he understood and he believed the very first Sunday of retirement. And he's been going on as a Christian ever since. There is this early opportunity, it seems, very early on when the wife has become a Christian. In those first couple of weeks, there seems to be a window of opportunity to present the message to a man. But if you miss that opportunity, and it is often missed, that's not the only opportunity. There'll be lots of other opportunities. So look out for your next second chance time. It might only be weeks away. The next opportunity time when God can break into that man's life. But of course, we have to ask the question, do you really want your partner converted? That's a good question. And here's Lillian to answer it.
Because we don't want the crisis, do we? We don't want those difficult times that Derek's just been describing. And we do want the convenience. One woman put it like this. She said, I go out to church on a Sunday morning and my husband enjoys getting Sunday lunch ready. And so I come home and everything's ready, and it would be very difficult if he were to come to church with me. We'd have to change our whole pattern on a Sunday. And she'd realised that, and she'd realised how comfortable she had become with her husband staying at home to get the lunch ready. There are difficulties as well in living with a fully committed Christian man. In our experience, when men who are older become Christians, then they become very committed because they are aware much more strongly of the other men, their friends, colleagues, who are not yet Christians. And they know the situation that they are in, and they're eager to share the new things that they've discovered. And so they're not prepared to just sit quietly in our churches and go along with the rest of what the church is doing. Don't think then, if your husband becomes converted, that you can sit back in the same kind of comfort.
In your survey, have you ever asked or worked out what is the length of time? Has there been an average time span?
No.
Husband?
Yes. The answer is not as yet. Yes. People who prayed, 28 years and so on. It's all.
One woman who came to one of our seminars told us that her husband runs a garage, and it's a good business. He makes a good living. But the expensive holidays and the extension to the house are paid for because he handles stolen property on the side. That's where the real profits were made and the real business was done. So if he were to become a Christian, that side of their business would stop, and she would have to come to terms with the less money coming into the home. And I believe that would happen to a lesser or greater extent in many men's lifestyle. the least that they're possibly doing at the moment is telling white lies on the telephone to clients or other colleagues. And as Derek said before, men don't like to be hypocrites. You can tell a white lie to someone on the end of a telephone and they won't know. But if you bring God into the picture, then God would know. And so you have to change that kind of thing. Maybe he isn't involved in anything dishonest himself, but he turns a blind eye to something that's going on in the company, some other part of the department. And if he were to become a Christian, he wouldn't be able to turn a blind eye. He would have to challenge things. And maybe one of the things that's keeping him away from making a commitment to Christian faith is because he does realise what the implications would be. And if we are to pray for these men to be Christians, then the wives certainly have got to think through some of those implications. One of the things that I like, especially about the Bible, is that it's about real people. When you read both the New Testament and the Old Testament, you find that the people are very like we are. And I'd just like to tell you about Gomer, an Old Testament character who had what for her was an amazing opportunity to marry an Old Testament prophet, Hosea, a young man, probably a wealthy family, and certainly a well-respected man in his society. And it must have seemed an amazing chance for her to be married to a man like Hosea. What she didn't know was that Hosea was going to begin to be really committed and really go to serve God. And so instead of it being the respectable married life that she anticipated, Hosea began to preach the kind of things that got him into trouble. He began to challenge the political leadership of his day. He said they were half-baked. He said they were running round like silly pigeons. Any Christian preacher who started to say the kind of things today that Hosea said in his day would have headline coverage in all the papers and create quite a stir. And that's what Hosea did. And he attacked the religious leaders of his day as well. He said, you are not leading the people towards God. You are not following God. And so when their first child was born, he called the child Jezreel, which doesn't seem to have any special importance to us, but she even had relatives who had been killed in that war. It was 20 years previously that defeat had happened. And so it would have had painful memories for her and a very grievous choice for the name of the...
We want you to keep on talking, actually, because we need your attention on him, not on me.
Name, and he said to the people, you know what happened last time you went away from God? Jezreel happened. A defeat happened. And so Gomer is left hurting at this choice of the name for the child. When their second child is born, a girl, he calls the child Lo Ruhamah. But if you put the little word lo in front of it, that is the negative, and so it really means not loved, not beloved. And so he uses this again as a sermon illustration. He says to the people, you have turned away from God, therefore God is saying to you, I will not show my love to you anymore. The marriage must have been getting quite rocky by this stage, and so certainly when their third child is born, Hosea calls the child, it's a boy, another boy this time, he calls the child Gomer had been going out again with her former friends. Maybe he had real evidence that the child was not his. But it's his sermon illustration. He says to the people, you have turned away from God, therefore God is saying to you, you are not my people. And that's the sermon illustration. And became, of course, for Gomer, the last straw. she leaves home and she goes away back to the kind of life that she had had before. It ends happily because God tells Hosea that he must go after his wife and win her back, and he brings the children together and his wife together, and sermon illustration. He preaches to the nation. God says, if you will come back to me, if you will return, then I will be your God and I will love you. And so Hosea is an extreme of the committed man who, because of his preaching, because of his commitment, causes real problems within the marriage. And as I say, it does end happily, but it was a time of great tension and great stress for her, and quite different from what she had anticipated. And that, I believe, is something that we really have to hold in mind when we pray for these men to be Christians. The consequences might well be drastic. Here are 3 pictures that illustrate something of what I feel happens when people become Christians. It's often a way of looking at things that is different from all of us. And one thing that we have to realise is that however it was that I became a Christian, the other person is going to come differently. So whatever brought you first to Christ, your husband will come through some other agency, some different way of thinking. If we look at this picture, some people see a flat shape. I found that very difficult. But the interesting thing is that the picture itself doesn't change.
Stagger away and get coffee, I hope. And also, there is, I'll forget to say this at the end.
The picture itself doesn't change. It's how you look at it. Here's another illustration that I remember being shown when I was a child. Do you see the faces first? Doesn't it, whether you look at the light or whether you look at the dark? But the picture doesn't change. It's within you that sees the difference. Third illustration is this woman. Do you see an old woman or a young woman? Same chin line can be the nose of a huddled up elderly woman. And again, the picture itself doesn't change. It's what you see, it's how you look at it that makes the difference. And I believe that illustrates something. I believe that illustrates something of coming to Christian faith. There are many links in the chain. There is your witness, your testimony at home. There's colleagues that a man will meet at work who speak of Christian faith. There will be a new challenge to his views that might happen from political events or something that he reads or something that he sees. Suddenly, in a moment, it can all fall into place, because it may be that the hostility that a person shows actually indicates that they are nearer than they're prepared to admit to Christian faith. And it will only be one more thing that helps it all to fall into position. I find it amazing that people can look at creation and not see the hand of God. There are many scientists now, top high-ranking scientists, who are coming to Christian faith through their new research. But how anyone can learn science at all and look at the pattern and the harmony, see the complexity and the simplicity, and not see the hand of a creator is amazing. But it only needs a very little thing, a change of perspective, for the whole thing to fall into place, and then you do see it, and you do see that there is a God, and somebody comes along and you begin to see that God can have a place in your life through Christ. So watch out. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen in a moment that one more thing will change. He already understands and it will come together. But watch out, because he's likely to become too keen and begin to stir up the whole church. So it has to be that we want him converted so that together the couple can work together to do the work of the kingdom. Because the potential, if these men who have lived in the world actually come to Christ, the potential that they have in the kingdom is enormous.
Thank you, my love. Now a handful of suggestions as we move towards a close. The first one is cling on to the times when God has answered prayer. Cling on to the times when God has answered prayer. Maybe you need to remind other people or tell other people some of the ways in which God has answered prayer in your life, so that when you forget them, then they will remind you of those things. You see, when God answers prayer in your life, it isn't just for that moment. It's so that it's a reminder to you for all time that he is the God who answers prayer. A lady said to us at one of our seminars that she'd kept a record, she'd kept a notebook of the way in which God had answered prayer. And when she now looks back through the notebook, she is constantly amazed at how many times she's forgotten that God actually did answer her prayers. So,
more yet. Well, they're looking so good.
Yes. Secondly, second suggestion, do stay attractive. Don't become dull and dreary and dowdy, as if that was sort of more spiritual somehow. You don't have to be exactly leading the fashion field, but you don't have to be so far behind that you've not even cleared the first fence. Oh, you wouldn't know anything about horse racing, but don't get so out of touch. Don't get so out of touch. Don't follow what I sometimes call the ECOF trend. You know the ECOF trend? The evangelical Christian Oxfam fashions. Now, I've nothing against Oxfam, and I commend their shops to you, but don't get so far behind. Do stay attractive. Third suggestion, maybe you ought to save the invitations for your husband to come to what I will call quality Christian events. Now, I've nothing against your preacher or your minister, but maybe just inviting him along to one of the routine activities is not the best thing to do, first of all. Maybe it ought to be something special. Indeed, I sometimes wonder if the family service is the first thing that you should try and get a man to come to. Now, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have family services or invite people along, but I'm not sure it's the best first step for a man. I've seen some men blackmailed into coming to family service. The children are taking part this Sunday, darling. You will come, won't you? And they sort of twist his arm up his back, and so he comes. And what happens? He comes along to church, and there are a lot of women there, and more children than usual, because it's family service. And what are you reinforcing? You're reinforcing the view that church is for the women and the children. But there's another interesting distraction, or sad distraction, a sort of noise factor. When you've got lots of women and children in the sort of family service, there's bound to be a bit of hubbub from the children. You can't keep them desperately silent all the way through, can you? They're playing with their cards quite happily along the back of the pew, and it just makes a bit of noise. If you've got a nicely carpeted church, it deadens the noise a bit, but some of the older fashioned churches, the noise level grows up a bit. Now, I've been interested to watch. The women folk are not troubled by the noise at all. Not troubled at all. Only if little Johnny goes quiet, then she's worried. She looks round then and she finds that he's climbed under 3 pews and he's tying someone's shoelaces together, and she has to go and rescue them. That's when the women take notice, when he goes quiet. Normally, the bit of noise around, well, that's normal. But the man is totally thrown by that noise. He's not concentrating at all on what the preacher's saying, because he's distracted by all these things. Goodness, why is she allowing her son to do that? I wouldn't allow my son to do that. And that's what's going through his mind. And he's not hearing the preacher at all. So I just wonder if family service Perhaps the best thing to invite him first of all is some kind of a meal event, because then he can say he's only coming for the food. That gives him the impression that he's saving face, doesn't it? He's actually coming to hear the speaker as well, the after-dinner speaker. If the after-dinner speaker is a businessman or a sportsman who's become a Christian, that's even better. Incidentally, it's always best if the ticket is brought from someone from the church brings the ticket along to the husband, the uncommitted husband, and says, will you be our guest and bring your wife as well? Rather than the church giving you 2 tickets and saying, try and drag your husband along to this. Paper called the Good News newspaper, Challenge newspaper. There's a class to respond, and many of them do. I know a church just recently, they had 24 husbands, uncommitted husbands with Christian wives. 16 of them came to the dinner, the Christian dinner, and listened to the Christian speaker. They were prepared to do that, and some of them are further along now on the road of becoming Christians themselves. And incidentally, while I'm talking about invitations, please don't invite a man to a meeting. He's had enough of meetings. If he's in business, the last thing he wants to do is go to another meeting. He had 3 meetings today, 2 of them were a waste of time, and the third one was an argument all the way through. He doesn't want to go to another meeting. So call your event a special event. If it's a meal, call it a meal. If it's an interview, call it an interview. If it's a discussion group, call it a discussion group. If it's watching a video, say it's watching a video. Don't say come to a meeting. That's the last thing he wants to do. Just sometimes our terminology puts a man off. So save your invitations for quality events. Number 4 suggestion, don't let things continue as they are in your church at the moment. Don't let things continue as they are in your church. At the moment, maybe your church hasn't got any stepping stones for men at all. Well, you just gently nudge the leaders. Just nag them a little to make sure that they set something up. You don't have to have all the church in favor. You don't have to have a church vote and 100% in favor. You just have to influence a handful of people and get something set up so that next year, if a young wife comes to become a Christian next year, then there'll be something in place for her husband to come along to, something that's Christian but not necessarily too religious. You can mobilize just 1 or 2 and that'll set the ball rolling. Don't let things continue as they are in your church at the moment. And then the other thing that we want to say very clearly to you is that you must keep hope alive. We've written out some of those verses. My God. We need to keep hope alive. Proverbs 23 verse 17 says, do not let your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. There is surely a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. We need to keep hope alive. Isaiah 40, that lovely verse 31, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. We keep hope alive. Jeremiah 29 verse 11, maybe that's a promise for some of you. Jeremiah 29, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. We need to keep hope alive. Romans 12 says, be joyful in hope and patient in affliction and faithful in prayer. Romans 15 and verse 13 says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. God's power in you, keeping hope alive. Or that lovely verse in 1 Corinthians 13, love always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. We need to keep hope alive. And maybe in your experience, very soon you're approaching one of these second opportunity times. Now, I know the man has to make his own decision, but maybe some of the men you know, maybe your own husband is coming close to one of these new opportunity times when God will nudge his life, will touch his life again. Here's a suggestion. Maybe if there are several of you in the same church in this sort of situation where you've all got uncommitted husbands, you've become believers, your husbands are uncommitted, maybe you ought to concentrate your prayers on just one of the husbands. One church I know in Essex, I think there were 9 husbands in this situation. The wives had become Christians, but all these 9 men were still uncommitted. But one of them was quite close to Christian things. He was showing interest. He was asking questions. He was reading Christian books. He was coming along to Christian activities. And so all 9 of the wives agreed that it was John who was the closest to Christian things. And they all concentrated their prayers on John. And 3 months later, he became a Christian. And in the last year, he's led 3 of the other husbands to Christianity. You know why? Because he understands exactly how they feel. He's been exactly where they are. He's far better than the vicar is at sort of answering all the questions these men have got. He knows exactly the excuses that they'll make. And he's become such an enthusiast for God. Actually, when he gets excited, he swears occasionally, but I don't know what the vicar thinks of that. But he's such an enthusiast that he's touching these other lives. Now, it may be, if you get together with other Christian women, it might not be your husband who's the closest. It might be one of the other husbands. But perhaps by concentrating your prayers on that one man, that'll keep hope alive. And maybe he'll be the key that'll actually bring in some of the other husbands as well. Now, I don't know how you normally close things in your home church or fellowship. Back in my home, often for our closing prayer, we link hands together. And I'd like you to do that tonight and be part of the sort of family. Whether you know the person next to you or not, if you'd like to link hands together and share in this prayer, I'll say it, if I may, out aloud, and I'd like you to make it your prayer. You to make it your prayer as well, saying it out aloud, repeating it after me. Here's the prayer then as we come to a close. Father, we are your children. We want to thank you for your love. We want others to know you. And your power. And your plans for our world. We want our families to know. We want our husbands to know. Father, reveal yourself to them in a clear way for the glory of your name. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I just want to commend again a couple of books that we know have been of help. The first one is called whether both members, both of the couple are Christians or only one partner is a Christian. It's one of the books that we've come across that seems to contain a lot of Christian common sense. So we commend that as a book that might be of help to you, Marriage Builder. And then another book that I've written called An Evangelism Cookbook. Now it isn't recipes for food, although we have sold 2 copies to people who thought they were buying a food book. It is actually their community, and particularly reaching out to men. And so ideas, an evangelism cookbook is a sort of ideas book. Back in my home, in the office, with Hazel, my secretary, sometimes if we're having a difficult day, then one of the staff will put on the coffee early, and Hazel will go and get out of our filing cabinet a file that we call our encouragement file. And it's letters that people have written to us of how God has answered prayers and dealt with situations. I'd just like to ask one favor of you. When a husband comes to know the Lord, you will write to us, won't you? And then I can put it in the encouragement file, and then when it's a difficult day, I can get the file out and read about how that man has come to know God. May God bless you.